Hey, everybody. Somebody let me know if you can hear me, please. I'm having a little bit of a computer issue, and Michelle should be popping right back in, but right now we're trying to overcome a technical problem. Can you hear me? Yay. Thank you, Mary. Okay, I am so sorry we are late. We were ready to rock and roll and had no sound. And so I was frantically rebooting my computer and grabbing my laptop and trying to figure out how to get this all organized. So thanks for being patient with us tonight. Michelle should be popping in here shortly. And in the meantime, welcome. We have lots to talk about tonight. There's a little bit of information about several cases that we all want to talk about. Okay. All right. So I was trying to grab a couple of the comments just to make sure people were hearing me. So thanks for everybody who let me know that you can hear me. And we've got a few things to talk about. So welcome to everybody who has been patient with me while we were working out our little technical kink. I ended up having to completely reboot my computer for some reason. And there are a few things we want to talk about. Probably the biggest news came out late today. The Idaho governor has signed the transport order for Lori to go to Arizona. I don't know what the holdup was on that. It seemed to have taken a while for them to get around to signing that order. Arizona filed the order several weeks ago, not very long after her sentencing, but it's taken a while for them to, for the Idaho governor to sign the warrant. So it's been signed. I actually saw a copy of it, although I haven't read through the whole thing yet. I know it's online, so we know it's out there. And there are a number of kind of minor but not major developments going on in a number of trials. Those who were following the YNW Melly case, that is the case out of Florida, the rapper who is accused of having shot his companions in a car. He claims it was a drive-by shooting. And there has been a big kerfuffle over some law enforcement and potentially prosecutorial misconduct. The prosecutor on the case was relieved of her duties. The judge said it was because it was possible she could become a witness in the case because of her involvement with the lying law enforcement officer. The lying law enforcement officer is actually the lead detective on the case. So it's ugly and going to be pretty messy. So the new prosecutor on the case just filed a motion with the court wanting to bring in about sometime last week, the prosecution filed new charges against Melly for witness tampering. And that had to do with him enlisting somebody in jail and somebody on the outside to contact his ex-girlfriend and convince her not to testify. So the prosecutor is claiming that that is clear-cut proof of consciousness of guilt, and so should be able to come in. So that's yet another motion that's going to have to be heard before this trial starts. Now, the last I heard, the judge was trying to pick a jury, and then they were going to determine when and for how long they were going to hear all those motions. I did not see anything today having to do with that. So I thought it was interesting that that seems to have kind of dropped off the radar. I suspect we'll see something in the next few days because the speedy trial clock is tick, tick, ticking. And he is entitled to retrial 90 days after the hung jury, and they're very quickly approaching that date. So the other case that we have been talking about is the Karen Reed, John O'Keefe case, which is pretty interesting. And that one has had a couple of interesting developments. You know, we have been talking about the way that the true crime community and internet sleuths can interject themselves into cases and become part of the case. And in this case, there is a blogger. I think he has a YouTube channel. I didn't follow up on that, but he is a blogger. Yeah, I'm sure he does have a YouTube channel. And his name is Aidan Kearney. He goes by Turtle Boy online. And up until recently, my understanding is he had a sports blog. He claims to be an award-winning journalist, although I couldn't find any evidence of what awards he's won. So I'll leave that to y'all, all my sleuths, to figure that part out. But there are, and doggone it, I had it up and I had to reboot my computer. So let me see if I can come up with the page here. The article about the case and the witness intimidation allegations here. I had it in an article. Let me see here. Bear with me here for just a minute, because there was an article here that did outline all of the allegations of he is being accused of witness tampering. And the allegations are that he was threatening witnesses. Doggone it. Of course, when I really need it, I can't find it, but I'll keep looking for it. So he was accused of tampering with witnesses. He was arrested and on the charges, and he is adamant that he has a lot of video from the courthouse and other supporting information that will exonerate him. But in the meantime, he's been charged, and he is. It's interesting that a lot of the folks who are reporting on this say they feel like that his arrest is going to boost his visibility and be good for his channel. So that will be interesting to see. That is the case where the woman who has been charged claims that she and her boyfriend of, quite a while, 3 or 4 years, who was an off-duty law enforcement officer, was, they went out, they were out at a couple of different bars drinking, then they went to a private home, and when they went to that home, she ended up dropping him off at the home to party. She was tired and said she wanted to go home. She was also had a lot to drink. She was very intoxicated, should not have been driving. And so she went home. He didn't show up. She drove back to the place where she stopped and picked up a couple of friends and went back to the place where she had originally left him, and discovered his body lying in the snow. He was cold. He had died of injuries and exposure. It's an interesting case because it involves a lot of off-duty police officers, and there are a lot of concerns about whether or not law enforcement is manipulating the evidence in the case. There is a theory that he went inside the house. There was at least one person in the house who he had a hostile interaction with, and it is possible somebody just said he has a demonetized YouTube channel because of delivering untruths. So I don't know that much about this guy, but it is kind of interesting. The case really has split people down the middle as far as their position on the case. There were a lot of people who believe that law enforcement manipulated the evidence, and that the evidence shows that he was involved in some sort of an altercation inside the house, and they threw him out into the yard where he died of exposure. There seems to be very little evidence to back up the claim that Karen Reed, his girlfriend, hit him with her car, either accidentally or purposefully. So it's going to be a fascinating case to watch how that plays out and where the defense is going with the case. And it will be interesting to see what happens with Turtle Boy, because it appears that bloggers are now becoming part of the story more and more. So we'll stay tuned for that one and keep following it, figure out what happens to the award-winning journalist that is Aidan Kearney as the case goes along. I did want to talk a little bit more about the Vallow Daybell case, because there are a couple of other things that have come about that make me wonder and have brought some interest in that connect the Daybell Vallow case to other LDS cases like Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand and Tim Ballard. And that connective tissue is a book called Visions of Glory. For those of you who might follow Mormon Stories, John DeLynn has done several episodes. I was looking for the book to hold it up, but John DeLynn has done several episodes about Tim Ballard and about Visions of Glory. So Visions of Glory was a book that came out in 2012. It was written by a man named John Pontius. He was a member of the LDS Church. He wrote this book chronicling what he claimed were visions and dreams that were told to him by a man who was known by the pseudonym Spencer. Much later, it became clear that Spencer was a man named Tom Harrison, T-H-O-M, Tom Harrison. And Harrison is a mental health professional. He is a professional therapist, and he is very, very well known in LDS therapy circles, as was Jody Hildebrand. He appeared on a lot of panels with Jody Hildebrand, appeared at a lot of the same conferences as Jody Hildebrand. So, and it's become clear that she read Visions of Glory and was interested in what he had to say. Now, Visions of Glory is recounts Tom Harrison's near-death experiences and the visions and dreams that he had as a result of those near-death experiences. Lauren Matthias says that she has it on good authority that at some point Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow met with Tom Harrison. Lori Vallow, in her telephone, one of the pseudonyms she had for Chad was Spencer. When Lori Vallow was served with the documents that directed her to produce her children when she was in Hawaii, she was laying around the pool. And when law enforcement came to serve those documents, she was reading a book, which she put down, and it was very clearly Visions of Glory. So this group were sort of orbiting around that book, which has really become sort of a movement within the LDS Church. Tim Ballard was also an adherent and was interested in Visions of Glory. And Tom Harrison, the therapist, was responsible for aftercare for the children who Tim Ballard was saving from human trafficking. So there are all these connections, and the connective tissue really seems to be Visions of Glory and Tom Harrison. So that's a pretty fascinating piece of it. Now, amongst that group, there was a website, a pay website, a platform called Another Voice of Warning. Avow was the site. And it appears that all of these folks at one point or another were involved with Avow. We know Chad Daybell was. In fact, that's where he first heard Julie Rowe's story, and that's where he first met Julie Rowe and wanted to publish her book. So there are these interesting connections. I think we're going to find that while this may not be a cult inside a high demand religion, I think we are going to find that this is a continuing movement within the LDS Church. The interesting thing about it, now, John DeLynn from Mormon Stories has done a 3-part series interviewing the daughter of Christopher Perrett, who is the owner and operator of Avow. And those episodes just came out. I think the 3rd one may be out now. And they're very interesting interview with her. She grew up with Christopher Perrett as and in a very hyper-conservative Mormon family. And so anybody who is interested in that facet of the Vallow story, I would recommend that you tune into Mormon Stories. Now, there are links in our show notes, but I do not have the links up yet for these series because they've just come out. Her name is Kim Coffin, Coffinn. She is Christopher Perrett's daughter. And she and her husband came on to talk to John DeLynn at Mormon Stories about her experience growing up with Christopher Perrett and the Avow community. So those are all fascinating ways to sort of access the Vallow Daybell story. As you all know, I've been neck deep in all of this as I've been writing the book, and I'm really getting close to wrapping up. I think within the next month or so, my manuscript should be finished and head off to the publisher. We do have an agreement that I will provide some updates to the manuscript as Chad's trial finishes. And the book should go to press right after Chad's trial finishes. So we've still heard rumors floating around that there are still some serious plea bargaining discussions going on surrounding Chad. Although I think John Pryor has an uphill battle, because I think Chad is naive enough that he really believes that if he did not actively participate in the deaths of Tammy, JJ, or Tylee, that somehow he's not guilty. I don't think he really understands the theory of aiding and abetting or the theory of conspiracy. So it may be that John Pryor is really unable to convince him that taking the death penalty off the table is his best avenue, because right now he is still facing the death penalty. We understand from the court that the judge is going to begin bringing potential jurors in mid-March, and in an effort to start the trial immediately on April 1st. So it appears, because this is going to have to be a death penalty qualified jury, it appears that it's going to take a little more time than it took to seat Lori's jury. And they're allowing 2 weeks and a pretty extensive jury questionnaire ahead of the beginning of the trial. So that's all that's going on in the Vallow Daybell case right now. Moving on, one of the cases that we've talked about is Sarah Boone. Sarah is the one who says that she was playing a game with her boyfriend when she zipped him into a suitcase and then passed out, and the next day realized he was still in the suitcase and was dead. She has been, I think there is a lot to talk about in that case, and it will be interesting to see how that one moves forward. She has had 6, I think she is on her 7th lawyer. Now, the last lawyer left a lot to be desired. We talked through the fact that regardless of how much discovery there is, regardless of how many other cases you have an obligation to communicate with your client. And it's clear that that attorney was not communicating with her. So he asked to withdraw. The judge agreed and has appointed a new lawyer for her. This time, the letter she sent the court did not have to do with the lack of communication or the inability to move the case forward, as all her other letters have. She was divorced and was receiving alimony from her former spouse. She is filing letters with the court asking to put her family court case on the docket to enforce her alimony. Her former husband has their son, and I suspect that he is claiming that he's asking not to have to pay alimony because he is the sole support of the child. She can't provide any support because she's in jail. There's also an update on Alicia Navarro. That was a case out of Arizona. The girl went missing. Actually, she didn't go missing out of Arizona. I don't recall where she went missing from. She was 14 at the time. They believed that she had run off with somebody that she met online. And she showed up at age 18, went to the DMV and asked to be taken off the missing persons list so that she could get a driver's license. Law enforcement, her mother was overjoyed to find out that she was still alive and well and living in Arizona, in a small town in northern Arizona. However, and the police at the time didn't express any concern about her welfare. She was living with Edmund Davis, who is 36. So the police didn't express any concern over her well-being, her welfare, and have been sort of quietly moving along, investigating the case behind the scenes. Interestingly enough, there goes that word again. One of these days, I'm gonna end up with a tattoo that says interesting. Interestingly enough, he was arrested a couple of days ago on child pornography charges after police found child images on his telephone. That he has not been charged with any sort of charges having to do with Alicia Navarro. But I think they found this reason to arrest him and get him into jail and get her away from him with the hope that she will disclose once she is out from underneath his influence. She will disclose what's been going on for the last 4 years, because as we say, she was 14 at the time that she disappeared. So if I were to guess, I think that's what's going on. Is law enforcement found a reason to arrest him, to get him in jail, to get her away from him, so that now they can begin to sort of let her decompress and debrief her now that he's not there exerting influence. So we did have a question last time, and I told you I would research it. So I'm looking at my notes here. How many countries have a statute of limitation on murder? It actually is very few, and many of them only have a statute of limitations on second-degree murder, on murder that would be reckless or in the heat of passion, or those sorts of anytime there is intentional murder. There are very few countries that allow that have a statute of limitations and allow people to avoid prosecution by running out of time. We talked about that in conjunction with Aruba, which does have a 12-year statute of limitations. However, a lot of countries, and I don't know about Aruba, I didn't find enough to be able to clearly say, but here's the interesting thing. Aruba was originally a Dutch colony, so they're probably take their legal system from the Dutch. In England and in any of the countries that were part of the British Empire and their legal system comes from British common law, they have no statutes of limitations except on minor crimes that you would go before a magistrate for. So in those countries, not only is there no statute of limitations on murder, but there's no statute of limitations on any what would be felony crimes. So I thought that was different than I expected. The other thing is that in a lot of places where they do have a statute of limitations, for example, South Korea just did away with their statute of limitations on murder. Japan has a statute of limitations on murder, but one of the things, in fact, they have done away with it. But in fact, in countries where there is a statute of limitations on murder, it is told if you flee the country. There is a story about a husband and wife who killed the woman's former husband, and sorry, have a little dog in here, and he's sort of wrestling around a little bit. In that case, the people fled the country and were gone from the country for what they thought was the length of the statute of limitations. But when they came back to Japan, they were surprised to find out that the statute of limitations told while they were out of the country. And so the clock stopped ticking and was stayed during the time that they were out of the country. So statute of limitations actually had not run when they came back, thinking that they were in the clear. It will be interesting to see whether that's the case in Aruba as well, because as you might recall, Joran van der Sloot has been in Peru for years. So I think we're not out of the realm of possibility. I don't think that we know for certain whether officials in Aruba might prosecute him. You all also asked about the college professor in the University of Idaho case who was defamed by the TikToker. This is a woman on TikTok who insisted, because her psychic ability told her that this professor was responsible for the murders, that the professor had been in a relationship with one of the girls. None of those things were true. They were all patently false. The woman was actually out of the state, in another state, for a conference at the time that the crime happened. So after sending several cease and desist letters to the TikToker, she finally filed a defamation suit, and it has been pending. The judge in the case has been hesitant to come down too hard on the TikToker because she is representing herself. She does not have a lawyer. So she's given her a fair amount of leeway. However, it really is going to come down to damages at this point, because there's no question that this woman defamed her. In fact, she admitted that she said all those things. In court documents, she admitted she said all the things that she was accused of having said, but said that it was her right, her First Amendment right to free speech and her right to practice her religion, and that her religion is a spiritual religion that gave her the visions of who committed the crime. So, and you asked about Crystal Rogers' case. That one is going to be fun to follow. See, what other word can I use other than interesting? They're interesting. They're not fun. And Tricia says, I talk about many interesting things on my show, and that it's a perfectly good word. But my husband says I overuse it. And he's also a fan. So Crystal Rogers, her longtime boyfriend is accused, Brooks Hauk is his name, and another man whose name is Joseph Lawson, have both been arrested for her murder. Her body has never been found. So this is another no body case. And in this case, they claim, in this case, the little twist to this is that her father, Crystal Rogers' father, who was a very vocal advocate for searching for her, said he was never going to give up looking for her, was certain he knew who was responsible, namely Brooks Hauk, who is a very wealthy guy in town. Suddenly, Crystal's father is killed in a hunting accident. Interestingly enough, the gun that was used to murder her father has been linked to Brooks Hauk's brother, who was the owner of the gun and sold it to someone. So that one is going to be interesting to watch. No body cases are always tough to prosecute. And so I think moving forward, there are going to be some things to, there are going to be some roadblocks for the prosecution because they don't have a body. But I think ultimately they will be able to go forward with that case. The couple other cases I want to talk about before we get to Markel. Sam Bankman-Fried, who is the guy who is being prosecuted for bilking his investors out of billions of dollars in Bitcoin. He is an absolute character. He was the guy who was arrested in the Bahamas, extradited back to the US, very wealthy family. He was incredibly wealthy. And he's got all this curly hair, although he now has toned his hair down and actually gotten a haircut, made himself sort of presentable for court. His counsel announced that he will testify. Unfortunately, that is a case that is not being streamed because that would be worth the price of admission to see him testify. And the Maya case, where the family is suing Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital for damages for accusing the mother of Munchausen by proxy. The mother committed suicide as a result of the pressure and the stress. That case is going forward. The defense is presenting their arguments, and I don't think they're doing very well. Tragos Law, the lawyer has been following that case. He does a lot more civil work, so it's interesting to hear his take on things because he does civil work, and so he's been following it along and pointing out some of the weaknesses in the defense's case. He had some interesting things to point out today. I don't think the defense is doing very well. So I think that one will be kind of interesting to watch how it comes out. Now, in that case, the family has already gotten a judgment against the agency that did the initial child welfare investigation. So it varies from state to state in the way that this is done. Some of those agencies, as it is in this case in Florida, are privatized. So they're actually private commercial operations that are run by people who are not government employees. In some states, those agencies are actually arms of child welfare or law enforcement or some combination, and so they are subject to the same rules as other state agencies. State agencies have limited immunity from civil suit. So depending on the charges, a state agency, you have less likelihood of being able to recover damages from a state agency, say child welfare. So in the case of child welfare, you have to be able to prove negligence on their part. They are insulated from being sued for anything except negligence. So they have gone after the deep pockets. They have not gone after the child welfare folks. They've gone after the privatized clinic that did the initial evaluation. And they have also gone after Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. And I have wondered a bit about how much responsibility the hospital is going to have. If the hospital was strictly following child welfare's direction, because when child welfare got into the case, they then were granted temporary custody of Maya. So they step into the shoes of the parent, and they make the treatment decisions that a parent would make. If the hospital was simply following what child welfare was telling them they needed to do, then they probably are a little bit insulated. However, it appears that the hospital was very clearly communicating to staff and to everyone else, we think this child is malingering. We think this child is, there's nothing wrong with her, and that she is simply doing this to support her mother's contention that she is sick. The prosecution appears to have put on a lot of information about Maya's condition, and from a number of doctors who she's been to and who have evaluated her. But then the plaintiff, not the prosecution. The defendant now has come out and offered their own expert to say that Maya never had CPS. So, but as I say, I don't think they're doing very well there. I don't think their witnesses are doing particularly well. That trial will likely go on for a few more weeks, probably at least a couple more weeks before we'll get to any kind of a verdict. Before we move on to Markel, I want to talk a little bit about Ferrier. Ferrier is the case where the boy was confined in a box in an 8x8 structure within a garage because of behavior issues. I want to say this is the case that has probably gotten the most pushback from you all since I started the channel. So I want to talk a little bit about that. When I talk about cases and I give you a case analysis, I'm doing it from the standpoint of the legal issues in the case. And so when I started to talk about Mr. Ferrier and what had happened, I was talking about what was being presented in court. What was presented in court, and I went back and listened to this woman's testimony. She was the expert who testified on behalf of Mr. Ferrier. Now, I realize that she was a defense expert, but she did review all of the materials, and she is an expert on reactive attachment disorder. Reactive attachment disorder is a horrible, horrible mental health condition. It impacts children, particularly children who were warehoused early in their lives, or who were subjected to abuse early in their lives. So my understanding is this boy came to the Ferrier family when he was about a year old, and he had been in a foreign orphanage. Now, I'm not clear which one. Foreign orphanages in India, in some of the Serbian countries, the Soviet bloc countries, also in India, some South American countries, as well as China. So these are countries where children were placed into orphanages. There were rooms filled with cribs of babies and few attendants, and the people were just literally, the babies were lucky if they got their diaper changed once a day and were fed and got bottles 2 or 3 times a day. So this was very poor, horrendous care, and as a result, these children did not bond with anyone at birth or in their first year, and are not, as a result, not able to form attachments. There is treatment for reactive attachment disorder, and the younger a child receives treatment, the better. Okay. So they did talk in the trial about the fact that this was a child who had been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, had been receiving treatment for reactive attachment disorder, and had, as is common in those kinds of cases, had lots of ups and downs. Kids with RAD have lots of ups and downs. Now, at no point did I say it is okay to lock your child in an 8x8 room. At no point did I ever say that. But this is a case about issues, and you all wanted to know about the legal issues in the trial. So I presented those to you. I do not condone locking children in an 8x8 cell. I think everyone involved in the case, including Mr. Ferrier, said that was very poor judgment. The question was whether or not there was intent to, he was charged with abusing the boy. Okay, now that's different than not providing services, neglect, any of those things. He was actually charged with abuse, and the crime of abuse requires that there be some intention, that the mental state connected to child abuse is to intentionally inflict abuse. The trial, the legal issue that the trial turned on was whether or not that he had intended to inflict the abuse. Now, the jury found he had, but that was the legal issue that I brought to everyone's attention, that in this circumstance where you have a child who has a diagnosed mental health condition, which causes him to act out very severely, and causes this family to be concerned about the safety of everyone else in the house. Okay. This is no small thing. They were concerned for the other children in the house. They were concerned for the other, for anyone else that was in the house. Now, it is perfect. It would have been perfectly acceptable for them to put a padlock on the outside of his door and an alarm and a camera on the outside of his bedroom door. That would not have been child abuse, but it was in the minds of the jury and of the finders of fact abuse to build an 8x8 cell in the garage for him. There's no question that this young man needed more treatment than he was getting, and absolutely probably should have been in a residential treatment facility with people who were trained to deal with his mental health issue. The thing that I wanted to point out is that very well-meaning people who really just want to raise and love kids often think that rather than bring another child into the world, let's adopt one that's already here and needs a home and needs us. And what people who are the most well-meaning people in the world don't understand is that these are children, even at very young ages, even at a year old, at 2 years old, are incredibly traumatized and damaged. And sometimes that damage doesn't show up in these children until they hit puberty. So you have this child who you are going along raising and things seem to be going well, and then suddenly they hit puberty and everything goes off the rails. And you suddenly have this child who is absolutely out of control, violent, it cannot function, is smearing their feces on the wall. These are all cases that I know of that I was involved in as an attorney. And these are parents who are absolutely ill-equipped to deal with a child with that level, that profound need. They're perfectly qualified, perfectly satisfactory parents for the average kid. But these kids are not average. They have profound needs. And these parents find themselves, and often what happens is they adopt them through a state agency, they adopt the child through an agency, and then the agency says, all done. And there's no help for them other than the help that will be available in the community to them through mental health counseling, through through their health insurance, whatever is available. But there is no opportunity for them to access any kind of state services because the child's theirs, just as if legally, just as if he'd been born to them. So it's unclear what steps they took to get any other kind of treatment for him. I've actually been involved in these cases where the adoptive parent has said, I am going to relinquish any parental claim to this child so that the child can go into state custody and receive services. Now, I understand that the Ferreters did not handle this situation well. They were at the end of their rope. They screamed and hollered. They were angry. They were frustrated. I get that all of that was going on. And nothing about what they did was appropriate or helpful to that child and to his condition. But what you all asked me to do was to give you my point of view about the legal issues in the case. So that's what I have done. The legal issue in the case was, first of all, was there an intent to abuse the boy? The jury found there was. They found that he was guilty. But the other things that I wanted to point out is that this boy is far from rare. There are children all over the country like him, children who were adopted at early ages after having experienced tremendous trauma and who are with parents who are ill-equipped to deal with the level of their needs. And it is and should be very concerning for all of us, because these children end up, if they don't end up in the state system, they end up at 18 on the streets, taking drugs, using drugs, homeless, and they end up in our prisons. So it is incumbent upon us to be aware that that these kids are out there, and that we have a whole sector of parents who are absolutely overwhelmed by these children's needs. And I will tell you that it often is because the agency that placed the child did not tell these parents about the child's history prior to them coming to them. I know of a number of cases that I was involved in where adoptive parents were absolutely given no information about the child's background until they were fully adopted and until it was too late. So, and I realized reasonable minds are going to differ. And I love about our community that we can disagree without being rude and nasty and unpleasant to one another. I love that about our community. And to be honest, we have 8,000 subscribers, and I'm okay if we just have the 8,000 of you that are all out there watching and participating, because this is a great community, and I feel comfortable giving you what I think is my perspective on the legal issues. And I feel comfortable that we can all have those conversations in the chat. I want to say I was not at all offended, by the comments and the pushback that you all sent me, because you were all very respectful and had questions and wanted to offer your differing opinion. And I think that's what makes our community stronger. And I think that's what democracy is all about. So other than the one who told me I didn't know what I was talking about and I was running my mouth, everybody else was pretty great about it. So now, lastly, let's talk about the Adelson Markel case. For those of you who might not remember which case this is the case out of Tallahassee, Florida in 2015. Law professor Dan Markel was gunned down in his driveway. It turned out that there was a connection to his ex-wife's family. He was divorced from Wendy Adelson. They had 2 young sons. Wendy grew up in the Miami area, and she was interested in moving back to Miami to be closer to her family. She has the kind of family that are very involved, think Piketon Massacre involved, in the lives of their children and their grandchildren. And so her parents were very supportive of her moving back to Miami. Now, the distance between Tallahassee and Miami is substantial. It's about 6 or 7 hour drive. Wendy and Dan had shared custody of the boys 1 week on, 1 week off. And so for them to move to Miami would mean that they wouldn't be able to maintain that schedule. So when she said she was going to move, Dan Markel filed an action in court asking the court to prohibit her moving the children. She could move, but she couldn't uproot the children. And of course, that meant she had to stay in Tallahassee if she wanted to continue to have regular contact with her sons. And that led, these are all allegations at this point. Well, as to Charlie Adelson, let's put it that way. Charlie Adelson was dating a woman whose name is Katie Magbanowa. And Katie had a couple of children with another guy named Sigfredo. So she went to Sigfredo and told him that someone she knew was looking for someone to do a murder for hire. He got another of his friends to enlisted another of his friends in the project, and they in fact gunned Dan Markel down in his driveway after he had dropped the children off at school, and the youngest one to Wendy. And so the 2 gunmen it was a very extensive investigation. They weren't sure it was ever going to be solved. It took several years to solve. They were able to establish the connection, and one of the 2 gunmen then confessed and cut a deal. The other one went to trial along with Katie Magbanowa. He was convicted. Her trial was a hung jury as to her charges. She was retried and found guilty. So now we have the 3 murder for hire conspirators, but we don't have the person who actually hired them. That appears to be Charlie Adelson, Wendy Adelson's brother. Now, Wendy Adelson's father is a dentist, and his brother is also a dentist, and they all work for the family practice, which has several locations all over the Miami area. There's a very successful dental practice, and they're quite well to do. So Charlie Adelson has been out and free since 2015. Some of the other co-conspirators are in prison, but his trial begins tomorrow. They have been doing jury selection for the past few days and have now seated a jury. So opening statements will start tomorrow. Now, one of the interesting things is that these witnesses have all testified before in the earlier trials, including Wendy Adelson. A lot of people believe that Wendy Adelson is also culpable and should be charged. It seems like the prosecutors here are sort of building a little bit at a time. And so they went after the gunman, the kind of low-hanging fruit. They were able to connect the gunman to Katie Magbanua, and then they were able to connect her to Charlie Adelson. Now they've got some phone intercepts, recorded phone calls, wiretaps, text messages that certainly suggest that Donna Adelson, the grandmother, the mother of Wendy and Charlie, was involved. And so it will be really interesting to see several things. Will Katie Magbanua testify again, or has she sort of served her usefulness? Harvey and Donna Adelson, the parents, up until a week ago, the prosecution was insisting that they needed to come in for a police interview and had granted them limited use immunity to go and talk to the police. At the last minute, both sides agreed that neither were going to call them as witnesses, and so they have never been interviewed by law enforcement, which is kind of fascinating. This is a story that interests me. As you all know, I'm always interested in a story that has more layers to it than less. And so I was very interested in the Vallow Daybell case because of the religious piece. I'm very interested in the Markel case because of the family law piece and the child custody piece, and where our child custody laws go that contribute to perhaps to these kinds of cases, and the fact that they had very overly involved parents, parents who were sort of involved in. Charlie Adelson sometimes talked to his mother 4 or 5 times a day on the phone. So, and it does sort of have a lot of parallels with the Wagner case. Definitely different socioeconomic levels, but it does have some kind of interesting parallels to that. So it is kind of on my radar for possibly something I might want to write about. Folks asked if I was going to go down there. I would love to, but I am really coming to the wire on my book, and the holidays are coming up, and I have a wedding to go to in the Bahamas. So I'm going to be away from home enough that I didn't feel like going down there for a few days, even a few days of the trial would be very advisable at this point. So, but I am going to be watching it. It is going to be streamed, and I will be watching it. Joel Waldman is going to be down there streaming live from the courthouse. So they'll be, he's at Surviving the Survivor. And so he and Carm will be down there. And so there are going to be a lot of folks covering it. And Joel is from Florida, so he's pretty interested in it. So while we, I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about this evening, and I'm sort of ready to take questions. While Michelle is queuing up questions, I have a couple of other things I want to remind everybody of. The quilt raffle is going on. The link that is in our show notes does work, but I have not figured out, and if you all know how to do it, please tell me how to put a link, a hyperlink where you can click and it will go to the site in the YouTube show notes. So if anybody knows how to do that, let me know, but I haven't been able to figure that out. The link that's there, if you copy it and paste it in your browser, you will get the page. The page comes up and asks you how many raffle tickets you would like to buy. I understand that there are some rules around YouTube as to whether or not raffles uh, uh, can be held, and they can be, but there has to be a way for people to enter and not have to purchase anything. However, I clicked the wrong button. I'm sort of keeping my fingers crossed that YouTube isn't going to stumble across this because we're little, and I can't go back and change it. So that one is going to go forward. All proceeds are going to go to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So whatever you donate will go directly there. I'm not keeping any of the money. And I also want to remind you that all of your PayPal donations, all of your Super Chat donations go directly to Michelle. So anything that you donate once YouTube takes their cut goes directly to Michelle. Michelle has been struggling. She started chemo a couple of weeks ago, and she's going weekly for her chemo. At this point, she's doing pretty well, but I am hoping that y'all will remember her when you're making your donations. So I hope she caught back up with us. I haven't heard from her, so I was kind of hoping that she got back in with us, but I haven't seen her. So I will just keep moving along. Please remember Michelle in your prayers and your thoughts. And if you are able, please drop her a super chat, because I couldn't do this without her. She handles all my social media. She handles the moderation for the channel. And so I think I think we'll move into questions. And I don't see Michelle in the chat, so I may have to pull questions. So I'm pulling up my cell phone to see if I can I sent you a new link. Can you get in? Let's see. But for now, I think I will run through. Notice she had some things that she starred when she was in the chat. So let me see what I can find in terms of questions. Weather in Australia is weird at the moment. Antarctic freeze is pushing throughout the south half of the continent and pressing the hot weather systems in strange El Nino stuff. So if you happen to be in Oz, you're getting some funny weather. We've had cloudy, rainy weather here, and that big cold front that's supposed to be coming down out of Canada is supposed to even drop our temperatures below freezing. And my friends in Bend are going to get 20 to 30 inches of snow on the ski resort. So they're all very excited about that. So I'm just continuing to scroll through questions and hoping that Michelle's going to catch up with us. I do see some comments about Lori being a little nervous to go back to Arizona. She probably is. The Maricopa jail is big, and I'm sure it's rough. But that is, well, I have lost Michelle, but that's where she needs to go. So I'm sure that she is concerned about it. Let me see if I can raise Michelle on the phone. Because now I'm concerned. Although they were supposed to get some bad weather, and when Michelle has bad weather, sometimes she has a hard time. She has a hard time with her internet. So I'm going to go ahead and keep scrolling on through and see if I can find some questions.
Hi, sorry, I can't answer this one. Please.
Well, I just got her voicemail, so not quite sure what's going on. Let me see. Kathleen says she was traveling around Colorado. Oh, Colorado in the fall is so beautiful. I'm envious. Gloomy San Diego, my goodness. What's going on? My daughter's in LA. I'm sure it's gloomy down there too. Hi, Trisha the trucker. I see that you are in Chicago. I did see that we have, I did see that there was a light dusting of snow in Montana. So, okay. Still looking for questions. Somebody said they were tired of Visions of Glory, but then here's Sheremy who says she watched about half of it and said amazing research they've done tying it to all the current cases. Yeah, I agree. It has been, John DeLynn has done a great job. And then, of course, Lauren Mathias and Megan Connor, that is Lori Vallow's cousin, so Rex Connor's daughter. And why is it that I keep forgetting the other woman's name who she was at Lori's trial and has been on with John DeLynn before and is and is oh, okay. Alicia Navarro went missing from Glendale, Arizona, and turned up in northern Arizona. Somebody asked, what would Sarah Boone need alimony for in jail? Well, she may want to pay her, she may want to pay experts. She may just want it for her commissary, creature comforts in jail. I don't know. But I think, here we go. Here we have a question. Do you think the ex parte hearing for Chad a couple of weeks ago had to do with JJ being released to family? Or do you think something else, still TBD? This is a good question. I don't believe it had anything to do with releasing JJ's body. The reason I say that is because that is not the subject that would typically be heard ex parte. So things that are heard ex parte are like Mark Means' initial motion saying he thought Lori was not competent. The later motion that Archibald filed saying that he wanted her to be reevaluated before trial started last year. Those having to do with mental health or with physical health, with medical concerns, would be things that would be done ex parte because of the HIPAA and confidentiality requirements. So I don't believe that the ex parte had anything to do with JJ's body being released. The other reason is because they all stipulated to it. So there wouldn't have been any reason for it to be ex parte. because the prosecution made the motion and Pryor signed it and agreed to it. So it didn't have anything to do with that. It definitely had to do somehow with something that would otherwise be confidential. So I would say mental health or medical. And, you know, it could very well be that he needs some sort of medical attention that's not available in the jail. So those are things that you would bring to the court's attention, and the judge would decide whether or not he could be transported outside the jail for some sort of medical treatment. Those would be my guesses. It was my husband who said I say interesting too often. So, and I always appreciate him watching and giving me good feedback. So, the TikTok lady needs her butt kicked in court. I agree. You know, it is really difficult for folks who are professional creators, journalists, people who understand what the law is, people who understand what the boundaries and the limits are in what you can do in the name of free speech. It gives us all a bad name when you have somebody like that who is just out there spewing their beliefs in a way that's not only not helpful, but downright damaging to a completely innocent person, all because she had a psychic vision. So, hi, Trisha the trucker. I saw that you were in Chicago. Have you heard anything recently about the dentist in Aurora who poisoned his wife and California dad who killed his 2 toddlers in Baja California? You know, I have not heard about either of these cases, but I will make a note and look into it. The father took his 2 children down to Baja California. He was in the throes of some sort of religious delusion at the time. And the dentist from Aurora, I have not heard any new updates on. Corey Richens is still that case is still perking along. Of course, we have the potential witness tampering charges going on with her. Not really sure, because nothing's really been resolved about that yet. So some of these cases, I'm surprised that we're not seeing hearings held. We haven't seen a hearing set yet on the Murdaugh case. We haven't seen a hearing set yet on the jury tampering issues in the Murdaugh case. We haven't seen a new firm trial date set for Sarah Boone. We haven't seen, there's a lot of things that are just kind of hanging fire right now. And undoubtedly, they'll all happen at the same time. Kathleen, thank you very much for your donation for Michelle. I appreciate it, and I know she appreciates it more than you could know. I do not know where she is tonight. I'm concerned that we've been having these technical difficulties all night. It may just be that she wasn't able to get back in, even though I did send her a new link. In the United Kingdom, neglect is a form of abuse, and so is restraint. He would be guilty of abuse with no question. Okay. So, you know, the definition of the law is very different in different countries and even in different states within the US. So I think one of the legal issues in the Ferrier case was the issue of intent. And in some jurisdictions, we have these more strict liability where if you neglected your child, it is assumed to be abuse, or you've established that it was abuse. So the U.S. tends to be a little less of that way, and so it is interesting though that they are also that in England and in British common law, there are much fewer statutes of limitation, which I think is kind of interesting. Thank you, Jane. I've seen this happen to more than one family in my career, and I certainly would never excuse anyone abusing or neglecting a child. And it's very clear that this boy had profound issues and needed much more support and much more treatment than he was receiving. But I wanted to point out that these families are ill-equipped to receive these children. And we as a community need to do a better job of preparing families to receive those children and continuing to support them. Did you see that Caitlin Armstrong tried to escape from security guards while leaving a doctor's office? I did see that. And I did see that somehow she was able to get out of her prison pants and run off in nothing but her long underwear. So that was interesting. Getting rid of the black and white stripes. She didn't get very far. They never lost sight of her. They brought her back into their control. And I'm sure that the jail is doing an in-depth investigation into how that all happened. And I did see that her trial starts next Monday. I'm not sure whether that one is going to be streamed or not. I got the impression it was possible that some of it at least would be streamed. So let's take a look at, if I were defending Charlie Adelson, how would you spin the wiretaps in his favor, especially the Dolce Vita? Yeah, that's tough. I think that they have gone to great lengths to try and get rid of that Dolce Vita. For those of you who haven't been following it as closely, Charlie Adelson, when they got the FBI decided that they would help local law enforcement by doing what they call a bump. And that was that a guy walked up to Donna Adelson, the mother, and handed her a piece of paper and said, my friend Sigfredo hasn't been taken care of. And he basically, what he handed her was a copy of an article about Dan Markel's death. And the intimation was that they were going to shake him down for more money. And that was, they did that to try and trigger them to have conversations about the case and to move some action along, which it did. So they got wiretap intercepts to between Wendy and Charlie, between Donna and Charlie. The ones between Donna and Charlie definitely produced some interesting results. But Charlie also met in this restaurant called Dolce Vita, met Katie Magbanowa. I don't know why I have such a hard time with that name. Met Katie Magbanowa in this restaurant. And there was an agent sitting nearby with a directional microphone and that filmed and recorded their conversation. But it was done surreptitiously, and the recording is not that great. It's a noisy restaurant, and the equipment didn't really pick up as much as they could have. the prosecution has had this recording enhanced, and they've used a computer to try and filter out as much of the noise and enhance the voices, but there are still portions of it where you can't really hear what they're saying. And so I think the defense has really gone after that as this isn't reliable. We can't tell the whole conversation. We don't know the context. But because the conversation's pretty damning, at one point, Charlie says, they're not suspicious. If they were, we would have already been on an airplane out of the country. So, I mean, there's a lot of concerning statements in that Dolce Vita tape that are going to be really hard for the defense to neutralize. I mean, there are other statements that are just as troubling. For instance, Wendy testified in both of the previous trials that Charlie came over and brought her a new big screen TV and said, I looked into hiring a hitman, but buying you a new TV as a divorce present was cheaper. And she repeats that to the repairman who comes out the morning that Dan is murdered. She's got a Best Buy Geek Squad repairman there working on the TV, and repeats that story to the repairman. So there is a lot. There's a lot. Her former boyfriend says that she at least knew that Charlie was involved in having Danny murdered. So there is a lot there's a lot of difficult facts that the defense is having to deal with. I really feel that if I were spinning the wiretaps, I would spin them in the direction of grandma. I don't think Charlie Adelson will do that because he's not going to throw his mom under the bus. But as a defense attorney, I would be saying, look, we need to pass the responsibility off to somebody else. It was either your sister, it was your mother, and you just happened to be the person who was dating Katie McBannel at the time. So, so that is kind of I'm continuing to scroll and see if I can find. Here we go. Hi, BB. What have you heard that indicates Chad is so naive? Surely Chad heard that Lori was convicted, even though she didn't actually kill anyone. Is he so dumb to think the same wouldn't happen? Yeah, I think he is. I honestly do not know whether he still believes that God is going to deliver him from this, or if he really is that dense. But I do believe that he feels like he's got a chance to be found not guilty at trial. And I don't know where that comes from. So, you know, the only thing I can think of is either he believes that God is going to intervene and he's going to be found not guilty. How did that work out for you, Lori? Or he really is that naive. Because I think he's foolish to go to trial. The death penalty is still on the table. Now, I realize that it's been 35 years since someone was executed in Idaho, but there's no guarantee that that's going to continue to be the trend. And he is going to have the death penalty hanging over his head. So I mean, if I were his defense attorney, I would be continuing to encourage him to look at taking a plea that takes death off the table. And I'm absolutely certain that the prosecution has offered that based on the outcome of Lori's trial. I mean, I think they feel like there's a good argument that proportionality, there's a good argument that that he is not more culpable than she is, and she escaped the death penalty. So I just feel like there's an impediment to him understanding and taking the deal, and I'm not really sure what it is, other than his own I don't know whether it's his prophecy that God's going to deliver him, or whether it's his naive belief that that he's not culpable. So thank you, Cutley. Much appreciated. Please keep Michelle in your thoughts, and I'm still hunting for questions. Thanks for your patience tonight. I'm not really clear where our Michelle is, whether we have a technology issue or whether she's not feeling well, but her chemo's on Tuesday, so it's possible that she's just not up to it. So thank you for bearing with me while I scroll through the questions. Amy says, Mindy something or other. I forgot her last name. You're right. Mindy is the third person who's been on John DeLynne's show with Lauren and Megan. Kavita Deva. Hi, Lori. I don't understand why Chad would not prefer the death penalty rather than life in prison without parole because of his bizarre religious beliefs. Dying is supposedly no problem. This may be part of it as well. It may very well be that he feels like that he is going to go to the celestial kingdom, and there he will be back together with his eternal wife, and that's the best outcome for him. Mindy Caldwell. Thank you, chat. I've scrolled down far enough to find it. Yes, Lauren Matthias, Mindy Caldwell, and Megan Connor. I was going to say Conroy for some reason. Sarah wants her alimony because it was intentionally awarded to her, and we all know she's a stickler for the law. Yeah, she is. Hi, Ladybug Lady. Hope your ladybugs are doing well. Since JJ was released, do you think they will release Tylee? Yeah, I do. And I'm not really sure what the hangup is. My understanding was that Kay and Larry have talked to the Cox family about the kids being together. And I think that is their intention. So it may just be that they are trying to work those details out, because we have not seen an order releasing Tylee's remains yet. But I think that's coming shortly. Sorry, I have to move closer so I can read the. Any news on Chad Dorman, who killed his 3 sons? You know, we have not heard a peep about this case. So that's definitely one that we need to look into and see what's going on it. What an awful case. What an absolutely horrible case. I suspect that the reason we haven't heard anything is because he is in the midst of a battery of mental health examinations, and we have not heard anything about it recently. For some reason, just thinking about mental health brought to mind the Michael Vaughn case here in Fruitland, Idaho. If you recall, little Michael Vaughn disappeared, and cadaver dogs alerted in the backyard of a neighbor across the street. Somebody involved in that was living in the home confessed at some point. There were 2 people that were arrested, a husband and wife. The wife was her case was stayed because of mental health issues, and eventually the charges against her were dismissed. I think that is probably because she has long-term mental health issues, and it's unlikely that she can be restored to competency. So I don't know about Chad Dorman, but you've got to wonder, somebody who does something so incredibly heinous, what was going on upstairs. And I'm certain that they are doing a number of evaluations on him. Yeah. Let me see. Joining late. Have you seen the news from Maine? Can you speak on gun laws? I have not seen the news on Maine, so I can't. I think that there are. I am very concerned, continue to be concerned about the ease with which people have access to guns. I have incredible respect for the Constitution, and I recognize that the Constitution assures the public's right to own and to bear arms. And there are very good reasons for that. Our founding fathers believed, oh my goodness. Oh my, I had not seen this. About 24 people killed in 3 locations. Not sure if the perp has been apprehended. Well, we're going to have to keep an eye on that one and find out what was going on there. That sounds suspiciously Wagnerish. I have deep concern about the ease with which people obtain guns and the ease with which they obtain high-powered automatic and semi-automatic weapons. While I understand the constitutional arguments, and I certainly support the Constitution and people's constitutional right to bear arms, it is concerning how easy it is for people with mental health conditions and who have previously committed crimes to put their hands on deadly weapons. So I continue to be concerned about that. I continue to be concerned about, the school shootings and the ease with which young people get a hold of guns. Ethan Crumley and the Crumley case is out there, and that one interests me because it's the first time that we are seeing law enforcement attempt to hold parents responsible for a school shooter's actions. I think the facts are pretty narrow in that case. I mean, let's remember that they're the ones who gave him the gun, who provided the ammunition, who understood that who took him out and taught him to shoot it, understood that he had some mental health conditions that should have been red flags. And then finally, they didn't take him out of school on the day that the school called and said, we have a problem. And that afternoon, he came back to school and shot it up and murdered classmates. So that one is going to be interesting to watch and to see how far the state can take that prosecution of the parents. I'm seeing a comment here. I think mental health services are lacking, is an issue impacting gun violence. Mental health, the lack of mental health services throughout our country, it contributes to a number of issues in our communities: gun violence, homelessness, drug abuse. And, you know, it really boils down to where we see the importance of putting our resources. You know, we all of the country, thanks to a lot of Supreme Court cases, have moved away from mental hospital sorts of settings. People are no longer being housed in mental hospitals and facilities. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was filmed in Oregon, at the mental hospital in Oregon, written by Ken Kesey, who was an Oregonian. We have limited the number of beds that are really available because we have downsized all of those organizations and moved to a community-based model for treatment. And it is only the most serious cases that are treated inpatient, and the inpatient beds that are available in any given community are very limited. So I do think that it's an ongoing issue, not just with gun violence, although I think we see it more. It's more. We see it because the outcome is so tragic and the outcome is so staggering. I mean, they're talking about 22 people in Maine being dead and a subject still being at large. So we see the impact much more profoundly with gun violence, but it really does impact all of the other areas, whether it's parents who can't parent their children, whether it's people who are turning to drugs and alcohol as a way of self-medicating their mental health, whether it's people who are homeless because they can't hold a job and stay in a living situation. I mean, when you have profound mental health issues, it doesn't take you very long to get thrown out of your apartment. You get, and then they have evictions on their record, and then they can't rent other things, and it's kind of like a vicious cycle. It's like the hamster wheel. So, didn't necessarily mean to get off on gun violence as a tangent, and it is a subject that people have incredibly strong opinions about, and it certainly is a political issue as well as a social issue. Speaking of political issues, I hear we have a new Speaker of the House, which is good news, so that we can get on with the business of the country, regardless of your party. It's good news that we're going to get on with the people's business, and so. It is, we've been talking for about almost 2 hours, about an hour and 3/4. And so I think we're ready to wrap up. I hope that I have gotten through questions. I see one more here. Question: what is your take on the possibility of the civil lawsuit against Ballard having the potential for criminal charges to be taken? Oh, good question. I think that there may very well be a good chance. I don't know. We haven't gotten a lot of very concrete information in this lawsuit yet, because the plaintiffs have asked for a protective order, for the judge to issue a protective order to protect their identity, and also to protect them and their families from repercussions. And so we haven't gotten a lot of specifics yet. So a lot of this, we haven't pinned down dates. And so it's unclear whether or not there is a statute of limitations issue in the criminal case. We don't know yet, but we will. I think that will become clearer soon. I think that if it is within the statute of limitations, I think we may see some criminal charges, and maybe not just for Ballard. The tricky part about this is a lot of that behavior happened in a different country. It didn't happen in the US. So there's a tricky issue of jurisdiction. Now, I know that at least one of the women said that there were some untoward things that happened on training missions that happened within the US. In particular, I think one in Seattle. But once again, we don't have all of the details fleshed out yet, so it's a little hard to tell. But the US government would not have jurisdiction over things that happened outside the country. So those would have to be prosecuted in other countries. And the likelihood of that happening, I think, is pretty low, especially in the South American countries, the banana republics. So I want to say thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you for your generosity with Michelle. And please keep her in your prayers and send her good juju. And especially on Tuesdays. Tuesday is her chemo day. We don't know yet how long that course of treatment is going to take, but surely throughout the rest of the year. So I tried to catch as many questions as I could in the chat. I will go back and review the chat and make sure that I haven't, that I didn't miss anything glaring. If you have questions, please post them in the comments below or email us, and so we can answer your questions. I have tried to call Michelle and I got her voicemail. When I'm done tonight, I will call her again and check in with her. So I certainly will be checking up on her. I usually check in with her a couple of times a week, in addition to our Let's Get Ready for the Live presentation or meeting. But I also know that we were struggling to get started on time because I was having a little technological issue, and she could see me, but she couldn't hear me. So it may be my technology as well. So I will follow up with her as soon as I get finished with you all. So I'm going to say good night. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your patience tonight. And thanks always for being the amazing true crime community that you are. Please email us or drop us a comment if you have cases that you have questions about and you would like me to talk about. Thank you for all your good wishes as I'm getting down to the deadline on the book. And I hope that we will see you back here Wednesday for more True Crime Wednesday. Good night.